I'm live. A slight time delay. Adjust this just a little bit. There. Maybe a little bit more. Let's see how that looks. Through the magic of technology, I am Facebook live streaming, but it's not backwards, but I have to make the iPad. I can't see what I'm looking at on my iPad, so I have to look at another monitor to the side. So if you see me look to the side, it's like I'm looking in a mirror that's about 3 seconds in the past or something. Crazy, crazy world. And it's not quite 8 o'clock. We will start officially at 8 o'clock. This is all like a pre-roll like they do on those game shows where they have the behind the scenes look. So I'm trying some new technology. a different setting. I'll just wait for people to arrive on this lovely Sunday here in Austin, Texas. I think the high was supposed to have been 105 today, or is that tomorrow? Tomorrow, Monday, is supposed to be. Oh, they're saying it's only going to be 104. So there we go. We got that going for us. Let's see. I'm just going to make sure everything's looking good. Hopefully sounding good. All right. Well, this is going to be problematic. I can see already. Because I don't know who's watching. Oh well, brave new world. We'll try it out tonight. So, I may not be able to give shout outs. We'll see. And I don't know how the volume is, but if people can post little commentary, maybe we'll know. I don't know. I'm just going to assume it's like I'm broadcasting from a spaceship somewhere. Though that's usually what I do on Wednesdays. And I don't know if the transmission is reaching anybody. Let's hope so. All right, we're going to go for it. I'm Paul Klemperer, your host for Shelter in Place Storytime every Sunday evening. And here we are in beautiful, sunny Austin. And another beautiful, sunny summer day. And my theme this evening is paradigm shifts. And I'm going to read from two sources. One is Stephen Kuhn's book, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, which I think was written way back in 1968. And I'm actually just going to read the introduction, and written by Ian Hacking, who will sort of summarize some of the main themes. But it's a great book. I had to read it for a sociology class I was taking in college way, way back. And it kind of has sentimental attachment to me because later my mother read it for some work she was doing in chemistry, since it is a legitimate book about the sciences. So we actually read the same book, even though she was not big on sociology. And so we discussed it. So it has sentimental value for me. Hold it a second. I'm just going to check how the broadcast is going. Okay. Well, as I thought, people are seeing it and they're commenting, but I can't see those comments, unfortunately. So I'm just can't give any shout outs tonight, but thank you if you're here, and hopefully you could hear everything. And I'm just going to proceed apace. All right, shelter in place story time. Have a sips, and away we go. Paradigm shifts. So Ian Hacking, this is the introduction to the structure of scientific revolutions, and I'm not going to read the whole thing. I'm just going to jump in and sort of give an overview. But let me introduce it so you don't just like have your mind blown right away. The primary idea is that human knowledge, and he's talking within the scientific tradition, is cumulative and works within a paradigm, and that as more information comes in, more discoveries are made, more insights, that paradigm starts to be threatened by a growing body of information and facts that don't fit, and the paradigm has to shift, and that's the nature of scientific theories, that they have to change and expand to accommodate new facts. And what was kind of revolutionary for this book was that it contradicted the idea that scientific knowledge was just kind of incrementally growing and growing in this sort of linear historical path, and instead showed how volatile and how resistant to change our understanding is, until we can no longer hold on to that old view and we have to give it up. But it's a revolutionary shift in consciousness in science, and by extension other branches of human knowledge. And so it has become somewhat of a model of thought for human culture and the way it shifts. Anyway, that's the basic idea. I'm going to just go for it. Here we go. Structure. Structure and revolution are rightly put up front in the book's title. Kuhn thought not only that there are scientific revolutions, but also that they have a structure. He laid out this structure with great care, attaching a useful name to each node in the structure. He had a gift for aphorism, and his names have acquired an unusual status. For although they were once arcane, some of them are now part of colloquial English. Here is the sequence. 1. Normal science. He called these sections not chapters, for he thought of structure as more of a book outline than a book. 2. Puzzle solving. 3. Paradigm, a word which, when he used it, was rather uncommon, but which after Kuhn has become banal, not to mention paradigm shift. 4. Anomaly. 5. Crisis. And 6. Revolution, establishing a new paradigm. That is the structure of scientific revolutions. Normal science with a paradigm and a dedication to solving puzzles, followed by serious anomalies which lead to a crisis, and finally, resolution of the crisis by a new paradigm. Another famous word does not occur in the section titles: incommensurability. This is the idea that, in the course of a revolution and paradigm shift, the new ideas and assertions cannot be strictly compared to the old ones. Even if the same words are in use, their very meaning has changed. That in turn led to the idea that a new theory was not chosen to replace an old one because it was true, but more because of a change in worldview. The book ends with the disconcerting thought that progress in science is not a simple line leading to the truth. It is more progress away from less adequate conceptions of and interactions with the world. It's a good one, huh? How's everybody doing? I can't see you, can't hear you. I'm just assuming that you're there. But we are Shelter in Place Storytime, and this is Stephen Kuhn, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, the introduction, describing it. Let us look at each idea in turn. Obviously, the structure is all too neat. History, the historian protests, just is not like that. But it was precisely Kuhn's instinct as a physicist that led him to find a simple and insightful all-purpose structure. It was a picture of science that the general reader could pick up. It had the merit of being to some extent testable. Historians of the sciences could look and see the extent to which momentous changes in their fields of expertise did in fact conform to Kuhn's structure. Unfortunately, it was also abused by the wave of skeptical intellectuals who called the very idea of truth in question. Kuhn had no such intention. He was a fact lover and a truth seeker. Revolution. We think first of revolution in political terms. The American Revolution, the French Revolution, the Russian Revolution. Everything is overthrown. A new world order begins. The first thinker to extend this notion of revolution to the sciences may have been Immanuel Kant. He saw two great intellectual revolutions. They are not mentioned in the first edition, 1781, of his great masterpiece, or greatest masterpiece, The Critique of Pure Reason, another rare great book, but not a page-turner. In the preface to the second edition, 1787, he speaks in almost purple prose of two revolutionary events. One was the transition in mathematical practice in which techniques familiar in Babylonia and Egypt were transformed in Greece to proofs from postulates. The second was the emergence of the experimental method and the laboratory, a series of events that he identified as beginning with Galileo. He repeats the word revolution several times in just 2 long paragraphs. Notice that although we think of Kant as the purest of scholars, he was living in turbulent times. Everyone knew that something profound was afoot all over Europe, and indeed the French Revolution was only 2 years away. It was Kant who set in place the idea of a scientific revolution. As a philosopher, I find it amusing and certainly forgivable that honest Kant himself confesses in a footnote that he is not in a position to pay attention to the minutiae of historical details. Kuhn's first book concerned with science and its history was not structure, the structure of scientific revolutions, but the Copernican revolution. The idea of scientific revolution was already very much in circulation. After World War II, there was a great deal of writing about the scientific revolution of the 17th century. Francis Bacon was its prophet, Galileo its lighthouse, and Newton its sun. At first point to notice, one that is not immediately obvious on a first skimming of structure, is that Kuhn was not talking about the scientific revolution. That was quite a different kind of event from the revolutions whose structure Kuhn postulated. Indeed, shortly before he published Structure, he had proposed that there was a second scientific revolution. It took place during the early years of the 19th century, while whole new fields were mathematized. Heat, light, electricity, and magnetism acquired paradigms, and suddenly a whole mass of ordered phenomena began to make sense. This coincided with, went hand in hand with, what we call the Industrial Revolution. It was arguably the beginning of the modern techno-scientific world in which we live. But no more than the first scientific revolution did this second revolution exhibit the structure of Structure, the book. A second point to notice is that the generation preceding Kuhn, the one that wrote so extensively on the scientific revolution of the 17th century, had grown up in a world of radical revolution in physics. Einstein's special, 1905, and then general, 1916, theory of relativity were more shattering events than we can well conceive. Relativity had, at the beginning, far more repercussions in the humanities and arts than genuine testable consequences in physics. Interesting, a shift in consciousness. Yes, there was the famous expedition of Sir Arthur Eddington to test an astronomical prediction of the theory, but it was only later that relativity became integral to many branches of physics. Then there was the quantum revolution, also a 2-stage affair, with Max Planck's introduction of quanta around 1900, and then the full quantum theory of 1926 to 27, complete with Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. Combined, relativity and quantum physics overthrew not only old science, but basic metaphysics. Kant had taught that absolute Newtonian space and the principle of uniform causality are a priori principles of thought, necessary conditions on how human beings comprehend the world in which they live. Physics proved him totally mistaken. Cause and effect were mere appearance, and indeterminacy was at the root of reality. Revolution was the order of the scientific day. Is this good? Are you with me? Hold on a second. I'm going to check some comments. Anybody saying anything? People are watching. I don't know if they can hear me. Well, okay. All right. Thanks for watching. I hope you can hear me. You may not understand me. What is it? Hear me now, understand me later. I'm going to go on with this. It's the introduction to the Thomas Kuhn, The Structure of Scientific Revolution. And just bear in mind that he's setting up this whole idea of understanding the way knowledge accrues, that we think it's sort of this linear, you just keep adding things on within a paradigm, but really what happens is the paradigm itself has to be let go of. And a new paradigm, we can't just grab a new paradigm because we're so used to the old paradigm. The new paradigm has to be constructed out of insights based on the new information. Scary stuff. And, my covert agenda, not so covert, is like we may be in a paradigm shift in which we don't know where we're headed. We don't know how to put all the new facts into a total package that we can say, oh, this is the world we live in. But we have to let go of the old paradigm. So that Newtonian paradigm gives way to the Einsteinian paradigm, etc., etc. Before Kuhn, Karl Popper, 1902 to 1994, was the most influential philosopher of science. I mean, the most widely read and to some extent believed by practiced science. Popper had come of age during the second quantum revolution. It taught him that science proceeds by conjectures and refutations, to use the title of one of his books. It was a moralistic methodology that Popper claimed was exemplified by the history of science. First, we frame bold conjectures as testable as possible, and inevitably find them wanting. They are refuted, and a new conjecture must be found that fits the facts. Hypotheses can count as scientific only if they are falsifiable. This purest vision of science would have been unthinkable before the great turn-of-the-century revolutions. Kuhn's emphasis on revolutions can be seen as the next stage after Popper's refutations. His own account of the relation between the two is logic of discovery or psychology of research. Both men took physics as their prototype for all the sciences and formed their ideas in the aftermath of relativity and quanta. The sciences look different today. In 2009, the 150th anniversary of Darwin's The Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection was celebrated. Oh, somebody's commenting. I just got to see. Sorry, I'm in this weird technology. Speaking of paradigm problems, where I can't see. Oh, good. Well, at least I think Tom's commenting, and that means he can hear me, which I'm assuming means everybody can hear me. Not just the voices in my head. You can really hear me. Okay. Darwin's The Origin of Natural Species was celebrated with great fanfare. With all the books, shows, and festivals, I suspect many bystanders, if asked what was the most revolutionary scientific work of all time, would very reasonably have answered The Origin of Species. So it is striking that Darwin's revolution is never mentioned in Structure, Thomas Kuhn's book. Natural selection does enter in an important way, but only to serve as analogy to scientific development. Now that the life sciences have replaced physics as top dog, we have to ask about the extent to which Darwin's revolution fits Kuhn's template. A final observation: current usage of the word revolution goes far beyond what Kuhn had in mind. This is not a criticism either of Kuhn or of the general public. It does mean that one should read Kuhn attentively and pay attention to what he actually says. Nowadays, revolution is pretty much a praise word. Every new refrigerator, every daring new movie is announced as revolutionary. It is hard to remember that the word was once used sparingly. In the American media, almost forgetful of the American Revolution, the word conveyed more loathing than praise because revolutionary meant commie. I regret the recent debasing of revolution to mere hype, but it is a fact that makes the comprehension of Kuhn a little more difficult. So that's a good argument that when we're talking about ideas that are really referring to science, we have to be careful of the language we use and not use language imprecisely or without awareness of the historical context of the way the words were used when they were written. Something to bear in mind as we all paraphrase each other and create little rhetorical boxes to squeeze each other into. I'm getting all worked up. I need a drink. Hope everybody's doing well on this Sunday, July 12th, 2020. All right, now he's going to list and talk about the particular categories that Kuhn has created for describing this process. Normal science and puzzle solving. Kuhn's thoughts were really quite shocking. Normal science is, he taught, just working away at a few puzzles that are left open in a current field of knowledge. Puzzle solving makes us think of crossword puzzles, jigsaw puzzles, and Sudoku, a pleasant way to keep busy when one is not up to useful work. Is normal science like that? A lot of scientific readers were a bit shocked, but then had to admit that is how it is in much of their daily work. Research problems do not aim to produce real novelty. A single sentence of Kuhn sums up the doctrine. The most striking feature of the normal research problems we have just encountered is how little they aim to produce major novelties, conceptual or phenomenal. If you look at any research journal, he wrote, you will find three types of problems addressed: determination of significant facts, matching of facts with theory, and articulation of theory. To expand slightly, 1. Theory leaves certain quantities of phenomena inadequately described and only qualitatively tells us what to expect. Measurement and other procedures determine the facts more precisely. 2. Known observations don't quite tally with theory. What's wrong? Tidy up the theory or show that the experimental data were defective. 3. The theory may have a solid mathematical formulation, but one is not yet able to comprehend its consequences. Kuhn gives the apt name of articulation to the process of bringing out what is implicit in the theory, often by mathematical analysis. This may not mean a lot to people that didn't take science or don't like to be pinned down. Sorry, but we'll get to metaphorical implications later. But this is like very nuts and bolts. You test things, do they fit with the theory? If they don't, then the facts may be wrong. If they do, then the theory's okay, or maybe the theory has to be adapted. Although many working scientists agreed that their work confirmed Kuhn's rule, this still does not sound quite right. One reason Kuhn put things that way is that he, like Popper and many other predecessors, thought that the primary work of science was theoretical. He esteemed theory, and although he had a good sense of experimentation, presented it as of secondary importance. Ooh, that's a can of worms there for scientists, I know. Theoretical versus experimental scientists, but we won't get into that. Since the 1980s, there has been a substantial shift in emphasis, with historians, sociologists, and philosophers attending seriously to experimental science. As Peter Gallison wrote, there are three parallel but largely independent traditions of research: theoretical, experimental, and instrumental. Each is essential to the other two, but they have a good deal of autonomy. Each has a life of its own. Immense experimental or instrumental novelty is simply missed in Kuhn's theoretical stance. So normal science may have had a great deal of novelty, just not theoretical. And for the general public, which wants technologies and cures, the novelties for which science is admired are usually not theoretical at all. That is why Kuhn's remarks sound somewhat wrong-headed. For a current illustration of what is absolutely right and also of what is questionable in Kuhn's idea of normal science, notice that the high-energy physics most widely reported by science journalists is the search for the Higgs particle. This involves an incredible treasury of both money and talent, all of which is dedicated to confirming what present physics teaches, that there is an as yet undetected particle that plays an essential role in the very existence of matter. Innumerable puzzles ranging from mathematics to engineering must be solved en route. In one sense, nothing new in the way of theory or even phenomena is anticipated. That's what Kuhn was right about. Normal science does not aim at novelty, but novelty can emerge from confirmation of theories already held. Indeed, it is hoped that when the right conditions for eliciting the particle are finally established, an entire new generation of high-energy physics will begin. Of course, this book is old already because they did find that Higgs particle. And look at how life has changed. The characterization of normal science as puzzle solving suggests that Kuhn did not think normal science was important. On the contrary, he thought scientific activity was enormously important and that most of it is normal science. Nowadays, even scientists skeptical of Kuhn's thought about revolutions have great respect for his account of normal science. All right, that's normal science. Paradigm. This element needs special attention. There are two reasons for this. First, Kuhn single-handedly changed the currency of the word paradigm so that a new reader attaches very different connotations to the word than were available to the author in 1962. Secondly, as Kuhn himself stated clearly in his postscript, the paradigm as shared example is the central element of what I now take to be the most novel and least understood aspect of this book. On the same page, he suggested exemplar as a possible substitute word. In another essay written shortly before the postscript, he admitted that he had lost control of the word. In later life, he abandoned it, but we, the readers of Structure, 50 years after it was published, and after a lot of the dust has settled, can, I hope, happily restore it to prominence. What does the word paradigm mean to you? As soon as the book was published, its readers complained that the word was used in all too many ways. In an often cited but seldom read essay, Margaret Masterman found 21 distinct ways in which Kuhn used the word paradigm. This and similar criticisms prompted him to clarify. The upshot was an essay called Second Thoughts on Paradigms. He distinguished what he called two basic uses of the word, one global and one local. Of the local use, he wrote, "It is, of course, the sense of paradigm as standard example that led originally to my choice of that term." I can see then, if this is a little bit opaque, using the term paradigm as synonymous with exemplar, where in linguistics a piece stands for the whole, where you can, from one example, you can get a picture of the whole structure. So I could see using paradigm meaning an example of something that then gives you an understanding of the whole or the bigger picture, if that makes sense. But readers, as he said, had mostly used it in a more global way than he had intended. And he continued, "I see little chance of recapturing paradigm for its original use, the only one that is philologically at all appropriate. Maybe that was true in 1974, but on this 50th anniversary, we can return to the intended use of 1962. I shall come back to local and global, but first some recapturing. Nowadays, paradigm, along with its companion paradigm shift, is embarrassingly everywhere. When Kuhn wrote, few people had ever encountered it. Soon it became trendy. The New Yorker, ever alert to and amused by the fashion of the moment, mocked it in cartoons. At a Manhattan cocktail party, a buxom young woman in bell-bottoms says to a balding would-be hipster, "Dynamite, Mr. Gersten, you're the first person I heard use the word paradigm in real life." Today, it is pretty hard to escape the damn word, which is why Kuhn wrote even in 1970 that he had lost control of it. Do you feel the word paradigm is used too much? Now let's backtrack. The Greek word paradigma played an important part in Aristotle's theory of argument, especially in the book called Rhetoric. That book is about practical argument between two parties, an orator and an audience, who share a great many beliefs that hardly need stating. In English translations, the ancestor of our word paradigm is usually rendered as example, but Aristotle meant something more like exemplar, a very best and most instructive example. He thought that there are two basic types of arguments. One kind of argument is essentially deductive, but with many unstated premises. The other is essentially analogical. We're getting off into some deep territory here. I need a drink. Have a sip. Shelter in place, story time. The story tonight is our brains, really, how we think about things. I'm going to go on a little bit more with this and then maybe jump to the other reading I have, which is more about the nature of argument and the idea of arguing being about dialogue, not fighting, but dialogue. You'll see how these fit together. In the second basic type of argument, something is in dispute. Here is one of Aristotle's examples, which many readers will find all too easy to update from the city-states of Aristotle's time to the nation-states of today. Should Athens go to war with its neighbor Thebes? No. It was evil of Thebes to make war on its neighbor Phocis. Any Athenian audience would agree. It is a paradigm. The situation in dispute is exactly analogous. So it would be evil for us to make war on Thebes. In general, something is in dispute. One states a compelling example about which almost everyone in the audience will agree, a paradigm. The implication is that what is in dispute is just like that analogy. Okay, that makes sense? So we're talking about paradigm as an example, but the example illustrates shared beliefs, that you don't even need to explain the example. The example rests on all these shared conceptions, underlying conceptions. And so then over time, the word paradigm comes to stand for that totality of beliefs rather than example that illustrates that we have those beliefs. Okay. I'm going to jump ahead because this is getting heavy. Heavy duty stuff here, philosophically speaking. Okay, we don't need all this, but it's great, and I recommend reading the book, and this is an introduction added later. But I don't want to hurt you too much by making you think too much. The idea of shelter in place story time is to relax and let your thoughts wander through the magic of literature. But you don't want to think too hard. So just let it sift. He's going to explain another word that Kuhn uses in his description of the process of scientific revolutions: anomaly. The full title of this section is Anomaly and the Emergence of Scientific Discoveries. Dun dun dun! Normal science does not aim at novelty, but at clearing up the status quo. It tends to discover what it expects to discover, filling in the gaps. Discovery comes not when something goes right, but when something is awry, a novelty that runs counter to what was expected. In short, what appears to be an anomaly. We come across stuff in our daily life, and if it doesn't fit, our best strategy is usually ignore it or get rid of it. Rather than, maybe I should rethink my whole life because this thing doesn't fit in it. The A in anomaly is the A that means not, as in amoral or atheist. The nom is from the Greek word for law. Anomalies are contrary to law-like regularities, more generally contrary to expectations. Popper, as we have seen, had already made refutation the core of his philosophy. Kuhn was at pains to say that there is seldom such a thing as simple refutation. We have a tendency to see what we expect, even when it is not there. It often takes a long time for an anomaly to be seen for what it is, something contrary to the established order. Not every anomaly is taken to matter. In 1827, Robert Brown noticed that floating grains of pollen observed through a microscope are constantly jittering around. This was just an outlier that simply did not make any sense until it was incorporated into the theory of the motion of molecules. Once understood, the motion was powerful evidence for the molecular theory, but previously it was a mere curiosity. Brownian motion. The same is true of many phenomena that run counter to theory but are just put aside. There are always discrepancies between theory and data, many of them large. The recognition of something as a significant anomaly that must be explained more than a discrepancy that will sort itself out in time is itself a complex historical event, not a simple refutation. And I'm just going to digress, not to stir up any hornet's nests, but when we look at society, and sociologists try to do this, and looking at events and trying to fit them into models, and things, don't fit. Are they mere discrepancies, but they don't have to change the way we look at the model? Or do they indicate they're not just anomalies sitting outside, but they indicate we don't understand our model? And the hornet's nest would be this idea of bad apples in an organization, and the behaviors that seem to keep recurring. And I'm not going to name any names, but social organizations, perhaps government agencies or bureaucracies, and then this behaviors that seem to be anomalies. They're just a few bad apples. Or do they indicate that we don't understand the way the actual organization works, and that they are not bad apples but part of the system? Food for thought. Crisis. Crisis and theory change also go hand in hand. Anomalies become intractable. No amount of tinkering will fit them into established science. But Kuhn is adamant that this does not in itself lead to rejection of existing theory. The decision to reject one paradigm is always simultaneously the decision to accept another, and the judgment leading to that decision involves the comparison of both paradigms with nature and with each other. An even stronger statement is made on the next page. To reject one paradigm without simultaneously substituting another is to reject science itself. So we can't really let go of a paradigm until we have another paradigm. That's an uncomfortable place to be at if the new paradigm is not easily understood or accepted by the majority. A crisis involves a period of extraordinary rather than normal research, with a proliferation of competing articulations, the willingness to try anything, the expression of explicit discontent, the recourse to philosophy and to debate over fundamentals. Out of that ferment, new ideas arise, new methods, and finally a new theory. Kuhn speaks of the necessity of scientific revolutions, He appears to urge that without this pattern of anomaly, crisis, and new paradigm, we would be stuck in the mud. We would simply not get new theories. Novelty for Kuhn was a hallmark of science. Without revolution, science would degenerate. You may wish to consider whether he is right about this. Have most of the profound novelties found in the history of science arisen from a revolution with the structure of the book? Perhaps all real novelties are, in modern advertising parlance, revolutionary. The question is whether structure, the book, is a correct template for understanding how they arose. So he's saying that we can see revolutionary changes, but is Thomas Kuhn's model the best way to understand them? Changes of worldview. Most people have no problem with the idea that the worldviews of a community or of an individual can change over time. At most, one may be unhappy with the overly grandiose expression worldview derived from the German Weltanschauung. I'm not speaking that very well, but you get the idea. Which is itself almost a word of English. Of course, if there has been a paradigm shift, a revolution in ideas, knowledge, and research projects, one's vision of the kind of world in which we live will change. The cautious will gladly say that one's view of the world changes, but the world stays the same. Kuhn wanted to say something more interesting. After a revolution, scientists in the field that has been changed work in a different world. The more cautious among us will say that is just a metaphor. Speaking literally, there is just one world, the same one now as in times past. We may hope for a better world in the future, but in a strict sense, favored by analytic philosophers, it will be the same world, improved. In the age of the European navigators, the explorers encountered what they named New France, New England, Nova Scotia, New Guinea, and so on. And of course, these were not the old France, England, or Scotland. We talk about the old world and the new world in this geographical and cultural sense, but when we think of the whole world, everything, there is just one. And of course, there are many worlds. I live in a world different from that of opera divas or the great rappers. Clearly, there's a lot of room for confusion if one starts talking about different worlds. All sorts of things may be meant. In Revolutions as Changes of Worldview, Kuhn grapples with the metaphor in what I call tryout mode, not asserting so-and-so, but saying, we may want to say so-and-so. But he does mean more than any of the metaphors I have just mentioned. Well, I'm not going to get into this, but that's a good question. And I love a good metaphor, but when we're talking about shifts in consciousness, we often like to use kind of platitudes and metaphors that don't, they can help us stay lazy, maybe that's my point. Rather than really thinking things in a different way, we're just sort of like letting these analogies kind of float around. Think about that one. Let's see. The reader must decide what form of words is appropriate to express a thought. The maxim, say what you want so long as you know what you mean, seems apt. But not quite. A cautious person may agree that after a revolution in her field, a scientist may view the world differently, have a different feeling for how it works, notice different phenomena, be puzzled by new difficulties, and interact with it in new ways. Kuhn wanted to say more than that, but in print he stuck to the tryout mode of what one may want to say. He never asserted in cold print that after Lavoisier, 1743 to 94, chemists lived in a different world, and a different one again after Dalton, 1766 to 1844. Food for thought. Okay, we're getting into some weeds here, but I hope you're enjoying this. It's just ways of thinking about change, and as we learn new things, we have to let go of old patterns to hold them, and that can be very poetic and mushy and lazy if we're not careful. That's why I like that this came out of the scientific world, as even though it's a philosophical book, that is really like factual. Okay, incommensurability. What does that word mean? Incommensurability. It sounds like something a lawyer would say to you when they're not going to give you money. But this is what it means. There was never a storm about different worlds, but a closely related matter incited a typhoon of debate. When Structure, the book, was being written, Kuhn was at Berkeley. I have mentioned Stanley Cavell as a close colleague. There was also the iconoclast Paul Feyerabend, best known for his book Against Method, 1975, and its apparent advocacy of anarchy in scientific research. Anything goes. The two men put the word incommensurable on the table. Each seems to have been glad that the other was, for a moment, traveling a parallel road, but after that their ways diverged. But the consequence was an immense philosophical dogfight about the extent to which successive scientific theories, pre- and post-revolution, could be compared with each other. I believe that Feyerabend's flamboyant statements had more to do with the heat of the exchanges than anything Kuhn said. On the other hand, Feyerabend dropped the topic, whereas it preoccupied Kuhn until his last days. Well, I don't know about all this. It sounds like some boxing match, but we'll just read a little bit more. Perhaps the fight over incommensurability could have occurred only on the stage set by logical empiricism, the orthodoxy in philosophy of science, which was current when Kuhn was writing Structure. Here is a simplistic parody of one line of thinking that is heavily linguistic, that is, focused on meanings. I'm not saying anyone said anything quite this simple-minded, but it does capture the idea. It was thought that the names of things you can observe can be learned by pointing. But what about theoretical entities, such as electrons, at which one cannot point? They get their meaning, it was taught, only from the context of the theory in which they occur. Hence, a change in theory must entail a change in meaning. Hence, a statement about electrons in the context of one theory means something different from the same string of words in the context of another theory. If one theory says the sentence is true and another says it is false, there is no contradiction, for the sentence expresses different statements in the two theories, and they cannot be compared. Heavy-duty stuff. Kuhn was accused in some quarters of denying the very rationality of science. In other quarters, he was hailed as the prophet of the new relativism. Both thoughts are absurd. Kuhn addresses these issues directly. Theories should be accurate in their predictions, consistent, broad in scope, present phenomena in an orderly and coherent way, and be fruitful in suggesting new phenomena or relationships between phenomena. Kuhn subscribes to all 5 values, which he shares with the entire community of scientists. That is part of what rationality is all about, and Kuhn, in this respect, is a rationalist. We have to be careful with the incommensurability doctrine. Students in high school learn Newtonian mechanics. Those who study physics seriously in college study relativity. Rockets are targeted according to Newton. People say that Newtonian mechanics is a special case of relativistic mechanics. And everybody who converted to Einstein in the early days knew Newtonian mechanics by heart. So what is incommensurable? At the end of objectivity, value judgment, and theory choice, Kuhn simply asserts what he has always been saying. There are significant limits to what the proponents of different theories can communicate to one another. Moreover, an individual's transfer of allegiance from theory to theory is often better described as conversion than as choice. At that time, there was a great furor about theory choice. Indeed, many participants to the debate contended that that was the primary task for philosophers of science, to affirm and analyze the principles of rational theory choice. Wow, this goes on and on. I didn't realize it would be so thick. I thought we could sum things up. But you get the idea that shifting your view to incorporate new facts in a new theory that explains those is not a simple thing, and that the idea of trying to, is it apples and oranges? If you have 2 different theories and you're trying to have them communicate, food for thought. I like to think that I can walk in somebody else's shoes or see through their perspective, but how much can you do that if you don't agree on what the terms mean? Or maybe this might just be an analogy, but if we're having debates now in crisis periods in society, and we're both trying to debate using facts, and we may even cite the same facts, but they don't mean the same things in these different theories that we operate in. Something to think about. I think I'm going to move on to the other reading. We have to give a shout out to Julie Slim because it's her birthday today, and wanted to wish her a happy birthday. And I'm going to go run over and say hi to her in a minute. That's why I have to end on time. But I do want to read a little bit. If you don't know Julie Slim, great singer in town, and it's her birthday. Here is the other book. It's called, where is it? Where is it? Where'd you go? Where'd my shelf go? Ugh, life is so complicated. Thank You for Arguing by J. Heinrichs. Let's see if I can read a little bit of this, and if this helps or hinders your brain tonight. I hope nobody's brain's hurting from anything I've read so far. It's just a little introduction, go look at this stuff. My only cautionary words are that I was reading the introduction, so he was giving a synopsis of the book, and there's other people that give even synopses of that. So it's easy to try to sum these complicated things up in simplistic ways, and I've done it myself. So let's let that be our watchword. Let's not try to oversimplify other people's thoughts. But that means you have to actually read stuff and think about it before you come to an opinion. I know that's hard, but we'll do our best. Okay, this is, the introduction, and the chapter is called Open Your Eyes. The Invisible Argument, a personal tale of unresisted persuasion. And the quote is, "Truth springs from argument among friends." David Hume. It is early in the morning. My 17-year-old son eats breakfast, giving me a narrow window to use our sole bathroom. I wrap a towel around my waist and approach the sink, avoiding the grim sight in the mirror. As a writer, I don't have to shave every day. I do have my standards, though, and hygiene is one. I grab toothbrush and toothpaste. The tube is empty. The nearest replacement sits on a shelf in our freezing basement, and I'm not dressed for the part. "George!" I yell. "Who used all the toothpaste?" A sarcastic voice answers from the other side of the door. "That's not the point, is it, Dad?" George says. "The point is how we're going to keep this from happening again." He has me. I have told him countless times how the most productive arguments use the future tense, the language of choices and decisions. "You're right," I say. "You win. Now will you please get me some toothpaste?" "Sure." George retrieves a tube, happy that he beat his father at an argument. Or did he? Who got what he wanted? In reality, by conceding his point, I persuaded him. If I had simply said, "Don't be a jerk and get me some toothpaste," George might have stood there arguing. Instead, I made him feel triumphant. Triumph made him benevolent, and that got me exactly what I wanted. I achieved the pinnacle of persuasion, not just an agreement, but one that gets an audience, a teenage one at that, to do my bidding. No, George, I win. What kind of father manipulates his own son? Oh, let's not call it manipulation, call it instruction. Any parent should consider rhetoric, the art of argument, one of the essential R's. Rhetoric is the art of influence, friendship, and eloquence, of ready wit and irrefutable logic, and it harnesses the most powerful of social forces, irrefutable logic, and it harnesses argument. Whether you sense it or not, argument surrounds you. It plays with your emotions, changes your attitude, talks you into a decision, and goads you to buy things. Argument lies behind political labeling, advertising, jargon, voices, gestures, and guilt trips. It forms a real-life matrix, the supreme software that drives our social lives, and rhetoric serves as argument's decoder. By teaching the tricks we use to persuade one another, the art of persuasion reveals the matrix in all its manipulative glory. The ancients considered rhetoric the essential skill of leadership, knowledge so important that they placed it at the center of higher education. It taught them how to speak and write persuasively, produce something to say on every occasion, and make people like them when they spoke. After the ancient Greeks invented it, rhetoric helped create the world's first democracies. It trained Roman orators such as Julius Caesar and Marcus Tullius Cicero, and gave the Bible its finest language. It even inspired William Shakespeare. Every one of America's founders studied rhetoric, and they used its principles in writing the Constitution. Rhetoric faded in academia during the 1800s, when social scientists dismissed the notion that an individual could stand up to the inexorable forces of history. Who wants to teach leadership when academia doesn't believe in leaders? At the same time, English lit replaced the classics, and ancient thought fell out of vogue. Nonetheless, a few remarkable people continued to study the art. Daniel Webster picked up rhetoric at Dartmouth by joining a debating society, the United Fraternity, which had an impressive classical library and held weekly debates. Years later, the club changed its name to Alpha Delta and partied its way to immortality by inspiring the movie Animal House. To the brothers' credit, they didn't forget their classical heritage entirely, hence the Toga Party. Scattered colleges and universities still teach rhetoric. In fact, the art is rapidly gaining popularity among undergraduates, but outside academia, we forgot it almost entirely. What a thing to lose. Imagine stumbling upon Newton's law of gravity and meeting face to face with the forces that drive the universe. Or imagine coming across Freud for the first time and suddenly becoming aware of the unconscious, where your id, ego, and superego conduct their silent arguments. I wrote this book for that reason, to lead you through this ill-known world of argument and welcome you to the persuasive elect. Along the way, you'll enhance your image with Aristotle's 3 traits of credible leadership: virtue, disinterest, and practical wisdom. You'll find yourself using logic as a convincing tool, smacking down fallacies, and building airtight assertions. Aristotle's principles will also help you decide which medium, email, phone, skywriting, works best for each message. You will discover a simple strategy to get an argument unstuck when it bogs down in accusation and anger. Wouldn't that be great that you could, just using these tools that he's going to give you, make all our problems manageable? Well, yada yada. It's a how-to book. But I think I liked it just because it's laying out the processes of thought that are going into argument, that like what's going on consciously and subconsciously when we are trying to, as we refer back to Kuhn, you're trying to give exemplars, paradigm. You're trying to say this, you give an example, and that example will make this person go, oh yes, you're appealing to what we share, the truths that we agree upon, and then you can say, by that, if we agree on this, then this thing by analogy works or makes sense. And we're trying to do that, but we are, as he's saying, we've lost the ability to argue logically. It's not taught, we're not trained in it, and so we have to relearn that, or at least be aware that yelling at each other is not the same as argument. Well, anyway, I'm trying to think of or find one little bit to sum up with. I'm going to read just a little bit more. This is chapter 2. Set your goals. Cicero's light bulb. Change the audience's mood, mind, or willingness to act. And then there's a quote from Homer. Aphrodite spoke and loosened from her bosom the embroidered girdle of many colors into which all her allurements were fashioned. In it was love, and in it desire, and in it blandishing persuasion, which steals the mind even of the wise. Homer. Back in 1974, National Lampoon published a parody comic book version of Plato's Republic. Socrates stands around talking philosophy with a few friends. Each time he makes a point, another guy concedes, yes, Socrates, very well put. In the next frame, you see an explosive pow, and the opponent goes flying through the air. Socrates wins by a knockout. The Lampoon's Republic has some historical validity. Ancient Greeks, like argumentative nerds throughout the ages, loved to imagine themselves as fighters, but even they knew the real-life difference between fighting and arguing. We should too. We need to distinguish between rhetorical argument from the blame-shifting, he said, she said squabbling that defines conflict today. In a fight, each disputant tries to win. In an argument, they try to win over an audience, which can comprise the onlookers, television viewers, an electorate, or each other. I like that. This chapter will help you distinguish between an argument and a fight, and to choose what you want to get out of an argument. The distinction can determine the survival of a marriage, as the celebrated research psychologist John Gottman proved in the 1980s and 1990s. Working out of his love lab at the University of Washington, he and his assistants videotaped hundreds of married couples over a period of 9 years, poring over every tape and entering every perceived emotion and logical point into a database. They watched hours and days and months of arguments, of couples glaring at each other and revealing embarrassing things in front of the camera. It was like a bad reality show. Well, that is life now. I wonder if that was like they expanded the lab and now we are in this giant lab. When Gottman announced his findings in 1994, though, rhetoricians around the country tried not to look smug, because the data confirmed what rhetoric has claimed for several millennia. Gottman found that couples who stayed married over those 9 years argued about as much as those who ended up in divorce. However, the successful couples went about their arguments in a different way and with a different purpose. Rhetoricians would say they instinctively followed the basic tenets of argument. I like that. So the idea being not to beat the other person, but to win them over. Okay, I'm going to stop there, but I recommend that. Let's go back. Thank You for Arguing is this book by, Jay Heinrichs. And then, of course, I started with The Structure of Scientific Revolutions by Thomas Kuhn, which goes way back to the 60s and has been updated and printed over and over and over. Check it out. And because, we all know that civility and being able to talk to each other and solve our problems together is a skill that we have not invested resources into. In fact, quite the contrary. We've invested resources into, I don't want to just say the noise machine. It would be easy to just say the noise machine, but we've invested resources into tribalizing, is that another way of putting it? And I don't know, I don't want to point blame, but I would say that if you find that your thoughts are easily commodified, if your thoughts can be connected to some group or product or newspaper or show, and that rather than engaging with somebody else and perhaps giving each other facts and perspectives that don't fit, anomalies, if you will, we consume stuff that reinforces what we already do believe. We've commodified our thinking, and are trying to reinforce this paradigm, or whatever you want to call it, because I don't know why, I don't want to say why we're doing it, but that it's almost a habit. It's like eating processed food, you might say. I don't want to get too much, but try an apple once in a while. Put down those orange Cheetos and try an apple once in a while. Anyway, I'm going to stop there. I hope that this has been fun and if not insightful, at least you know that these books exist and that there's some good stuff out there if you want to pursue it. And I'm going to stop there, and I've been Paul Klemperer, and I'm wearing my dad's cap from Harvard with the chemistry and biology as part of this. And hopefully it's not backwards, you can see it, but that was part of the underlying theme. Science, go team. And let's say, stay in touch, email me, pksaxhq@gmail.com. More stuff coming. I'm going to take a break. This Tuesday is my birthday, so I'm not going to be doing the jazz history class, but it'll pick up again next week. If you want to be part of that, just email me. And, of course, Space Force Jazz Lounge every Wednesday, so look out for that. Until then, carry on, and may all your arguments be good ones.